here. Maybe Jeannie will join us later if she can get a signal in Maine, but I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order at 6:02. So the first order of business on our agenda is to approve the meeting minutes from the last meeting. Those were posted on the Slack. First, does anyone have any changes or questions on the minutes? Okay, great, can I get a motion?
A motion.
And a second?
Second.
I'll second.
Okay, I saw Ellen first. Great, thank you. All right. Moving on, our next agenda item was to discuss the mission and purpose of the Joint Facilities Advisory Committee. We talked about this, I think, quite a bit in January when we first started meeting, but now that we are really digging in and ramping up, it seemed like a good time just to kind of revisit that. Looking at our notes from our last meetings and what we had put on the out in the Amherst Citizen. I just kind of put together kind of just a little something I'll read. So it's the SAU Joint Facilities Advisory Committee has been tasked with conducting an analysis of the state of public education facilities in Amherst. They will provide recommendations to the governing bodies, Souhegan Cooperative School Board and Amherst School Board, regarding the interim and long-term facilities needs of the public school facilities in Amherst, taking into account educational outcomes and how to best level the cost impact to residents in an efficient manner. Encompassed in the charge are the following facilities: Clark Wilkins Elementary School, Amherst Middle School, and Souhegan High School. So that's a little bit of a mouthful, and I could share it on a screen if you wanted to see it in writing. I think we've all seen it probably numerous places in the Citizen. So before we move on from that, does that kind of what everybody, yeah, good. So I think right now our next steps at our disposal, we have all of the capital needs assessments completed for all the school buildings. The Souhegan 2.0 project, which I'm excited to have Lance and Ann walk us through tonight. We have the enrollment projections that we've been looking at. And really we're just at that point where we're waiting on the Amherst School District architectural and engineering study that Lance and Ann will also provide an update on where they're at in the timeline. Once we have the report on that, we'll work together as a committee to arrive at a consensus for what recommendations we will bring to the Amherst School Board and the Souhegan School Board. So the timeline that we shared in the Citizen last month has us arriving with the final report from LaValle Brensinger in the fall. So September, possibly, we might be at a place where we can bring our recommendations to the boards if everything remains on track. So I just wanted to make sure that we all had the same kind of understanding of the timeline, our role in that timeline, voting and providing those recommendations to the board, and if there were any questions before we started digging in any deeper. Okay, great, good. So I'm going to, looking at the agenda, the next item on our agenda is a subcommittee report out. I'd like to flip-flop that if you are all in agreement and move to the update from the board representatives on the unassigned fund balance discussions, because I know that Ellen, you have a time frame tonight. You have to get off early, so.
Right.
Are you comfortable if is everybody okay if we move those two items around?
Yeah, and I'll probably ask Tom for his input as well. Do you want me to start? Shannon?
Tom, you're on mute. Yeah, Ellen, if you could start, that would be great, and then, yeah.
So at our last school board meeting, we were, on our agenda was to review the end of the year unassigned fund balance. And it's come down to Amherst. I don't have the exact figure. I think it's 770.
771.
Thank you, 771. And so once we had that figure, we went through a pretty detailed list of some facility, I would say, some issues that administration feels are important and should be addressed maybe first. So we went through the list. We did table a few of them. We needed more information, but we did sort of approve. And when I say approve, we all kind of agreed that they were priorities. I think in our June meeting, is when the community will see the finalization of a figure that we're comfortable using, and B, what facility items we deem appropriate and necessary. The list was long, no doubt. The list was long. So that's pretty much where we're at. I'm hoping as we move forward, as with all our boards, that we take our May and June meetings to evaluate our unassigned fund balances consistently, so that the community knows to expect. If that's an important issue with them, they can attend our meetings, provide feedback, or even ask questions prior to the meetings. And that was discussed in our SAU meeting, I believe. So that's it for Amherst. So we're sort of in the middle. We've seen a lot of items, and they came from the facility review, that the big one for Amherst School District. A lot of them have had dates on them. And although some dates were later than now, they were priorities. We have a couple issues that are currently popping up, including a boiler leak. So we'll wait for an update on what was going on with that. They were getting estimates and really, and I don't know, Adam, if you have an update, you can feel free to pipe in. So we're reviewing those kind of things that we didn't schedule as well.
Great.
Any questions? Tom, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't think so. I think we'll have more definitive stuff when we have our meeting in June, but I know the ductwork was a big one that we were looking at, or to cleaning the ductwork, I should say. And then, you know, so there were a couple of smaller things, a new snow blower at Wilkins, but other than that, the boiler is likely going to be the big one that we have at this point.
Yeah, and there were a lot of questions about the roof at Clark.
Correct.
And getting some, again, we had to table quite a bit. We didn't have all our information. So we're looking forward to June, getting more information on those items like the roof, the boiler. And there were some, what were they called, Tom? Some switches.
The main electrical power switches, the one that,
Yes.
the master switch, the one that blew at Sauhegan, we were talking about those as well.
Yes, they are very expensive. So we
Yes.
wanted more information on that as well. So that's where we're standing. We're right in the middle. Christine?
I just had a question. I didn't watch the whole meeting. Was the AMS roof part of any of that discussion?
It's going to be for the next meeting. We received an email about that, and that was just something that wasn't on our list. And so
Okay.
we've reached out to, I believe it's Michelle, and then Michelle is going to work with us to get the information either at the meeting or before the meeting so we can talk about it then.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Good. Easy group. Thank you.
Awesome. Pim or Stephanie, Pim, are you giving the update for the Sauhegan board?
Yep. So we've got approximately $291,000 in our unassigned fund balance at the moment, roughly. And we're trying to decide exactly what we're going to do with that. We've got lots of projects. Michelle did a great job giving us a whole list of projects and prioritizing those. At the top of that prioritization is doing some renovations to the science classrooms. That comes with a hefty price tag, which is above the $291. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't be able to do it. It means that we may have to parcel out some of the items within that, those renovations to at least get things started. And not just started, but, you know, get some of the items that will not get us over that 291. We have lots of other things that need it as well. We have some of our HVAC units that need to be replaced in the annex as well. That kind of leads to student comfort or discomfort currently. And we have several other projects that are right behind that. So at this point, we're just trying to understand where we are, where we're going to be. We have this, we talked about it a lot at our last board meeting, and or actually 2 board meetings ago now. And we came to the decision of thinking about it some more and coming back on our June 2nd meeting and giving some direction to Adam and Michelle about which stuff to go forward with. There are some, at least one, if not more, members of our board that want to return a lot of that money to the taxpayers, which is obviously very admirable, but we'd like to get a jump on some of these projects if we can. So it's all still need, we still need to go through that and decide what we want to do, and those decisions will be made come the 2nd of June.
Thanks. Does anyone have any questions for Pim? Victoria?
I just have a comment for both of your boards. I'm happy to see both of you talking about the unassigned fund balance and what can be done to maintain the facilities. Because I know when we talk on this committee, sometimes we talk about the things that have been missed or not taken care of over the years, and why weren't they done? And it's nice to hear you guys, being on top of it here.
Good, thanks.
I have a question. The 2 items that you were looking at, and this may come out when we go through the review a little closer, do they point to anything that is in 2.0? The labs, I feel like, are in there, right? Is that...
Yeah, the classroom, the renovations to the science classrooms, I believe, are part of 2.0. And yeah, that's it. I mean, the HVAC stuff, that's more maintenance related. There might be some parts of 2.0. I haven't looked at it lately, to be honest. So
that's
I'm
what
not
tonight's
exactly
for.
sure. Yeah. So I do have it right next to me here, so I might be leafing through it very soon. But anyway, if we're going to go through it anyway, I might as well wait. So hopefully your questions will be a little bit better answered at that point.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions about unassigned fund balance updates? Nope. Okay. Subcommittee report out, public relations. We've met twice as a subcommittee since our last larger group meeting. Our first meeting focused on our May update to the citizen, which hopefully everyone's getting the online citizen and seeing that there in the schools section. They published our update along with the timeline that takes us through to when we as a committee get the report back from LaValle Brunsinger, and then make the recommendations to the board. So that's exciting. Our most recent meeting, which was on May 14th, I did post the minutes for that meeting on the Slack line. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time recapping. You can look at them there, but they really just focused on the different community groups in town that we need to engage in the next step of the process. We did have some questions for Anne and Lance, but we've reached out to Anne and we're working through that. So unless anyone has any questions, I'll keep it brief because I know we have a lot to cover.
I'll just add that we had a really great meeting, that first meeting, and I'm going to review the notes that you published on the Slack line, and we're going to get you answers to your question about a survey very soon. And I really enjoyed our meetings, and I love the energy that that committee in particular brings to the project, and I look forward to working with you guys.
We're grateful for all of your expertise and your time and help too. So thanks, Anne.
Yep.
Okay. So with that, it looks like we are on to agenda item number 6, which is the update on the Clark Wilkins Annie study, and that's for Adam and Lance.
Yep. Is it possible for me to share my screen?
Adam says yes. There we go.
You should be able to. Let me make sure the security settings don't prevent it. But yeah, you should be able to.
I get a host disabled participant screen sharing right now.
Okay.
You can make me a co-host or.
Yeah, let me find a way to. Oh, I just shared my screen. That's not what I wanted to do. Let's see, Lance. Make co-host. There you go, buddy. You should be a co-host and should be able to share now.
So I'd like to take this a little bit out of order rather than jumping right to the Sauhegan report. I'd like to get some feedback on where we're at with the K through 8 report. We have gotten some teacher feedback, and what I'd love to do is kind of a working session with all of you to kind of vet that and let me know your thoughts on those same type of questions. Overall, I can give you brief update on the building review. We'll go through the staff questionnaires and what we found. That's the bulk of what I'd like to review. I can give you a brief update on our programming, and I did bring some sample questions that Ann and I worked on for potential questions we could ask the public, and I'd love to hear this group's feedback before that marketing committee puts it out.
Awesome.
So overall, we're still on our timeline. We're a couple weeks away from trying to put together some initial drafts of the existing analysis and programming and visioning. We have gotten information back from Adam on population and on class sizes. We've got your your studies that you've done, and we've been out to the site, and we've gotten our teacher feedback. The graphic timeline that Anna kind of put together, I know you guys had shared this out, simplified timeline, still on that track. So we were able, and I'm sorry, I'm going pretty fast through this, but we were able to get out to each of the buildings, review it. Now you have nuts and bolts, what we call a nuts and bolts report. You understand what the condition of your roofs are, and that our goal when we went out there was to start reviewing it for, can this building take an addition? Does this building work for education? Is this building a secure building in terms of school planning? And does it, does it function well? Because
Lance?
I think, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I ask just a couple of schedule questions? So
Sure.
I know you took us through that quickly, and I appreciate that. But as one of my purviews in this committee is kind of to keep things on track. So I'm looking at what you have proposed in your detailed plan. Are there any of these items that you are behind on, or is everything, like right where you expect it to be?
I'm essentially right where I expect it to be. The one item I haven't scheduled yet, which I'd like to schedule, is the review with select school admin. We did get their questionnaires back, but I would like to have a couple Zoom meetings, which I'll go into on the next steps here.
Okay, I'm just trying to find that on here. Review with select admin.
It's review space use, and that's under existing analysis. So we haven't been able to do the face-to-face meetings yet.
Okay, so that's moving out for another week or so.
Yep.
Probably beyond this week, I would imagine.
Yes.
Okay, and otherwise you're fine on schedule?
Yeah, otherwise I'm 2 weeks away from being able to put together the draft of that and review with this group.
Perfect. Okay, thanks. Sorry for the disruption.
No problem. So we're just digging into this. I haven't summarized this yet and put it into a report form. What we've done is documented a lot of conditions that we found that we think need to get into a report. Each of the floors has been verified, measured. We can provide you now with Revit files, so you'll have them for future use, and what the current uses are of each of these spaces. This will be used as a template when I review with the principals how these rooms are being used and some of the commentary we got back from both the principals and the faculty. As you can see, there's a fair amount of notes at each of the school that were conditions that we need to review with them. At Clark, some of the same. We have a fair amount of notes that, it's a little bit simpler building, smaller building, but some things that we want to review. These are just our notes off there. I don't expect you to read them right now. They'll end up in the report. And the same thing at Wilkins School, some of the notes that we found and verifications that we need to do with the principal. So that's in progress. But the big thing I wanted to review was our feedback from our teachers. So what this is, what I'm showing here is I'm going to have several slides that go through things that we heard from the educators when we asked them, what are some of your issues? What would the ideal classroom look like? What would the ideal environment look like? And we asked them a whole series of questions. They did a great job giving us feedback. If you see hashtags next to them, that means that more than one teacher said the same thing. So what I'd like to do is kind of review this with this group, and I would love you to speak up and say, I disagree with that point. If you agree with everything, it stays in. If we're missing stuff, then let's talk a little bit about that here. So I've got just a few slides for each school. So at the middle school, the number one issue, teachers mentioned repeatedly, acoustic separation issues. Now this actually does tie to another number one issue, which is the third issue, which is the portable walls are an issue. So acoustic separation was the #1 spoken thing for all your teachers, saying if you can fix something, fix that. Air quality and comfort issues, #2 issue, right there, right in line. Too hot, too cold, difficult to control. Some of those things that I think you probably know that it's an aged system and it's something we need to correct. The portable walls need replacing, not replacing in the sense of give me new portable walls, make them go away. A lot of people mentioned the acoustic issue in the same sentence, or they mentioned it in separate questions of get rid of the portable walls. The portable walls also have other issues in that they don't function well and they don't have access to outlets and you can't put anything on that wall. So there are a myriad of issues with those portable walls. In that same area, triangle rooms, several teachers, I think probably every teacher that taught in a triangle room, as well as new teachers that taught in triangle room, mentioned the triangle rooms are not a great shape for education and are problematic to rearrange your room in. Poor electrical and access to power, pretty common with the building of this vintage. I mean, it was way before 1-to-1, so nobody anticipated every student having a computer at their desk needing to charge it. The band room is undersized in music areas. The drinking fountain, you know, that they really said it just should be better equipped. That was mentioned by a couple teachers. Small classrooms was commented. I believe the principal is actually the one who said the driveway cuts through the recess, which they see as a safety issue, which should be addressed. It was noted both in our report as well as by a couple teachers that a couple classrooms have no natural light. So everybody in agreement with these things so far, I'm assuming? Pretty straightforward. Couple more, some desires and needs at Amherst Middle School. So when we asked them what kind of space do you need to implement your curriculum, these were the #1 things. Most frequently asked was a breakout space for student use, and it was mentioned in several different ways. Some of them said, I just want a spot for a student to go read. I need a spot for a group of students to go work together. I need a spot for students to be calm and quiet, to take a test, to do individual work. But a lot of people said, give me a breakout space close to the classroom that I can send students into, supervise, and bring them back. Several of them said new furnishings would make a big difference. And if we had new furnishings, now, new furnishings, some of the comments suggested one type of furnishing, and then the next person would suggest the opposite type of furnishing. So one of the comments was, please give me trapezoid tables. And I swear the next person that answered said anything but trapezoid tables and I'll be happy. So I think some of that is going to be that you're not going to have a one size fits all furniture, but some flexibility in furnishings would be good. And, you know, that'd almost be a whole study group of educators to say, what do the furnishings look like ideally for these rooms and what do we want for a variety of sizes? One of the teachers even pointed out, they said they have bar height tables in one of the art rooms and the kids fight over who gets to sit there. So even the kids are looking for variety, you know, standing height and bar height and things like that. Classroom and teacher storage was mentioned repeatedly throughout. They want storage inside the classroom and they want storage outside the classroom. Pretty common for a building that's really at its max. Common areas and collaboration areas at the middle school level was mentioned repeatedly. When we get to the Sauhegan High School report, you'll see that that's actually the #1 thing we're trying to accomplish at the high school as well. But they're trying to get these large collaboration areas, these common areas for groupings that's typical for a middle school today. Professional development space was also brought up repeatedly in learning areas and conference areas. Some mentioned just a conference area where we can get some professional development done. Others mentioned very specific professional development spaces, one of which I'm going to show you because it was mentioned repeatedly. Larger staff room, I think that kind of ties into that staff area that could be part of that professional development expansion. People just noted that you have a staff room there that really doesn't work for what it's supposed to work for. Improved dimmable lighting in all areas. That would be part of any light swap or light upgrade. I had a few comments about the library, a computer lab. You know, I think you have a computer lab there now, and they said, you know, another computer lab would be great. And then a couple people mentioned just even with 1-to-1, please don't make the computer lab go away. Student storage was mentioned, that the students need a spot just like the teachers need a spot. Essentially, they feel they're kind of breaking at the seams with people putting everything everywhere in every room. And outdoor learning area was a common theme. There are several takes on what an outdoor learning area is. Different teachers described it differently. The art teacher described one, and the an educator described it differently. I think that's that itself, but having outdoor learning would be great. A couple teachers noted, I would love to have outdoor learning, but it's not as high a priority as some of those top things. Everybody with me so far? Good. More spaces for special education areas. That was mentioned not just by special educators, but also by teachers saying they feel the special education just doesn't have enough real estate to be able to implement their services. A few one-offs were a STEM specific lab. I don't know if your curriculum is going to grow into that. It sounds like you have an enrichment program that does STEM, and one of the people said you should have a specific lab that is just the STEM project lab. Student display areas, pretty common for most schools. They said they should have more student display areas throughout the building. One person actually, when they talked about outdoor play space, they said, you know what, for middle school age, there should be less recess and it should look more like an outdoor lounge area, have some courts and some fields there, but kind of a gathering area for students. I thought that was actually a pretty nice comment. Again, flexible furnishings for various seating heights. I think 3 or 4 people actually mentioned the SNHU sandbox. So my guess is that some of your teachers probably went there for professional development. I have photos of it. I'll share that with the group here in just a moment. I actually had to look it up myself. It's a dynamite professional development space, but it's worth seeing to see what they're trying to say is this is the kind of space we would love to have in our building. A couple people mentioned that the indoor recess, they don't really have a great space for indoor recess. One person said, if you're going to build something outdoors, why don't you make it big enough for the whole school assembly and make an outdoor amphitheater? Teachers who taught science said, give us good science rooms with sinks. And one person mentioned, consider an auditorium for 500 to 600 and also some potentially recording areas. So question to this group is some of these things do kind of sound like wish list items.
Yep.
Which of the ones on this list that we're looking at now do you guys think are probably not on our table? I'm specifically looking at the auditorium for 500 to 600. Is that?
Yeah, we have
Amphitheater.
Okay, amphitheater, auditorium. Okay.
I know, isn't the PTA working on outdoor classroom space? So we should probably
Yes.
make sure that whatever they're considering here, what they want, we're kind of collaborating on that.
Yep, we're working with the principal over there, so it should be, a lot of what they're suggesting on this survey should be tying in.
Okay.
Okay.
I would say sound booths for recording probably.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
Wish list
Yep.
item.
Yeah.
Sound booth. Good. Some of the others you can guess they're great items and they probably won't cost anything. Student display areas, that's an easy thing to do. It's a no cost item. It can be part of our plan.
Yep.
What about this?
Oh, I'm sorry, Lance.
What about the STEM specific lab? Do you want me to talk to the principal more on that, or is this something that somebody
What is
here
that
has experience
really,
with?
Yeah, no, what does it mean? So that you're doing science, technology, I mean, it's really STEAM right now,
Right.
are all in the same space?
Yeah, so what they described was a project room dedicated to STEM projects so that you would have space to build, investigate, almost like a maker space is what they're describing, dedicated to what they described as almost an after school or a part-time program now.
Okay. Kind of
Which
like
there
a
is a
playroom for
makerspace
middle
there
schoolers.
now.
Yeah, I think this person was a para and said they should have their own space dedicated to that.
Okay.
Maybe that's something I can review with the principal and understand how that program ties into the makerspace now.
Yep.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
Okay.
find a way to utilize the same space or similar space.
And what is the student display area? Is that the personal equipment or is it stuff they're going to do for the school?
Student display areas, what they meant was a place for student to hang their artwork, for able to do either digital displays or things like that, essentially giving students ownership of the space and having more tackable surface and things like that that they could display projects in art. Like I said, it's a pretty simple one to accomplish with just tackable surfaces.
Yeah, the corridor.
We
The
do
new
have to
corridor
review
you're going
that.
to put in.
Yep. And we've done as far as gallery space for some
Yes.
schools that really like to do it. Like I said, it's not an overly expensive item. Okay.
I'd be curious about the professional development space.
Sure.
I agree. Thanks.
Yeah.
So the
So
sandbox was mentioned a couple times. This is at SNHU. And since it was mentioned at not just this building, it's also mentioned at the next building. My guess is a few educators have been here.
Yes.
You can see it has, lecture area, and it has small meeting area. It has work area. It is very well done. It does take a significant portion of real estate. I don't probably think that anybody said, build me that. They said, like that. I like that kind of professional development space. And obviously, if you built something like this in any of these schools, it would be student used too. Ellen, you have a question?
Yeah, it seems to me that the SNHU sandbox could also be used by the students for all that collaborative work, and maybe the teachers could be using it after school or before school on their, late start days. And it certainly doesn't have to look like this, but you can see that there's space for collaboration, there's space for flexible seating, and those are a lot of the wish list items, I think, when we're talking about collaborative learners, that we would have little pockets. There's even a couple of little quiet spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So if it could be multi-use, I would be more supportive of it. Just a teacher PD spot, that would be a struggle for me, because I think to meet in the cafeteria.
Yeah, I agree with Ellen. I think any sort of multi-use space is kind of great when it comes to this type of thing. And I also think on the first slide, the triangle classrooms, the walls, the HVAC, those have been the overarching things that we've heard just from the community, from the community and when we've been in the schools as well. So that doesn't surprise me at all.
Okay, so we'll look at not this scale of space, but some kind of collaborative space that could accomplish what this accomplishes for professional development and for student collaboration.
Yeah, I think our staff room at the middle school, though, does have a lot to be desired. It is a very small room with a very big table. So,
no doubt.
Yes.
Yeah, so the staff room, PD room, maybe the staff room could function, if it were bigger, or that's an internal room as well, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
It is.
Yeah.
It's a no window room. But
Right.
I think just to
It's in the
interject,
basement too.
I think the staff room is separate from the PD room, because the staff room is sort of where you go to get away for a few minutes during the school day. You certainly don't want students in there, or even them near there, if you can avoid it.
That's a good point.
Okay, that's a good note. All right, moving pretty quickly. Other significant comments that people shared that it was good to hear from this group. Several teachers said that they feel the school is safe and proactive about their security plan. So we did ask how, what should we do to improve safety? There was one person, I think, that mentioned that the entrance sequence, they would like to see more visions on, but predominantly everybody said they felt they were pretty good to safety and security wise. I did get a fair amount of comments from the library. My guess is you have 3 or 4 librarians, or at least you have 3 or 4 people that answered the questions mostly about the library. Some people noted that the library is good size. They'd like to see it more inviting. They like it to be more flexible and get natural light into it. Given that there was, I think, 3 or 4 people that just focused their entire questionnaire on the library. So as you can guess, they're probably all the people that work there the most. One person mentioned that card access should be considered as part of any project, and I think it's a valid point. And one person mentioned, which I think it was actually, I don't remember who did, but they'd like to see more integration across curriculum and less departmentalization. So any solution we come up with, very few people answered the question of what should we change, as in they want to flip this on its head. But this was one that said, make sure we have a lot more integration than we have now. They don't want to see art in one wing and the kids in the other and things like that. So everybody in agreement with those things? Okay. Let's talk about the elementary schools. So number one issue, poor electrical access to power. Again, older buildings, they just don't have enough outlets to plug into. They have a hard time integrating technology. Right there in line, poor HVAC air quality, too hot, too cold, can't control it. It's not energy efficient. Needs to be corrected with whatever we do. Third in line, the lighting. They'd say, give me some dimmable lights, give me some light I can control, upgrade them. A couple people mentioned the shared cafe and gym. Again, you're probably aware of this, but it's distracting for the gym teacher, and it's distracting for the cafeteria students. Neither of them works great when they have just a shared space that's not acoustically separated and not in different areas of the building. One of the comments I had was the STARS program needs more space. I'll review that with the principal when we meet, and because I need to understand the STARS program. I just saw this and I haven't even investigated what is the STARS program.
Special education.
Okay, as I assumed with the acronyms that it was somewhere in that realm. So I can actually review that with special educators. There was, for the elementary schools, there was less issues and more, I'd like this space and this space is missing. So there's actually 2 slides of spaces where they said, we should have this, and less about, these are my current issues. These are classroom storage, this could actually go to a complaint, but all of them said, give me more classroom storage. It's pretty common in there. They said someplace to put stuff inside the room. Our rooms are cluttered. Separate the gym and cafeteria. Sorry, that was duplicated in the last slide. Staff workroom was mentioned at these facilities as well, that there's not adequate staff workspace a couple times. Building storage. So, well, some teachers said I need room inside my classroom. Others said I just need room somewhere in the building to put stuff, and we just don't have enough. It sounds like all your storage spaces are absolutely filled. A better playground. I think it was the principal actually said the morning play area could definitely use some work. It sounds like you have a committee that's working on playgrounds. Are they working at this school as well, or these schools?
No, we're just working on outdoor classrooms, unless there's another playground committee.
Okay.
Is the playground space in the morning different than the rest of the day when they say morning play area?
It's not, but all of the students are outside in the morning. So you don't just have one grade level outside at recess. You have
Okay.
all 4 grade levels, so it's more children.
That makes sense. Yeah.
More small group and conference areas. If you're short on storage, my guess is you're short on a lot of these smaller rooms. So they said if we could have small group meeting areas, that would be helpful. Some of those did mention different uses for that. I think they could be breakout rooms like we described earlier, close to the classrooms. Acoustic separated areas, particularly for counseling areas. They said, we don't have a lot of privacy in some of those rooms. One teacher mentioned a 1,200 square foot classroom to support the workshop model of learning. I was more interested in talking with the administrators about the workshop model of learning and if that's a curriculum they're planning to adopt. I don't know, Adam, if you've looked into that at all, or.
It's not a curriculum. It's a teaching method where students move between workshops around the classroom. So it's something where an 800 square foot classroom doesn't support that type of learning modality.
Is this a learning modality you think that would be pretty widely used at the elementary level?
Very much so.
Okay, so we need to consider at least some larger rooms than the current size classrooms if we're going to adopt this type of teaching. Okay. Inviting lobby was mentioned a couple times. The first impact the students should get and the community should get is a more inviting lobby if we do some upgrades. And common space outside the classroom was mentioned a couple times even at this grade level. More special education areas was mentioned. You can see a couple hashtags there. It was mentioned a few times. Acoustic separation at the music room. That was both by the music teachers as well as anybody who's close to the music room.
Mm-hmm.
Conference rooms. This one actually said for the principal and the AP, but I think, conference rooms are conference rooms. It sounds like teachers also said we need more conference rooms. Professional development area like the SNHU sandbox came up again a couple times. Outdoor learning areas. Sounds like you guys are working on that.
Mm-hmm.
For the elementary school, a tech lab and a maker space with modern technology and modern upgrades. They mentioned some of the equipment they would like to see in there. Essentially, it was a higher tech space. They didn't call it makerspace necessarily. They called it more of a technology lab. Upgrade the technology throughout all buildings. A couple teachers mentioned, modernized interactive whiteboards. I think one teacher mentioned that their whiteboard was not fixed to a wall, that it was mobile, and they kind of wanted to see that corrected. And then a larger music room with acoustic separation. Is everybody in agreement with some of those needs?
I find it interesting, and maybe it's the way that the questionnaire was worded, but it does not seem that there are any teachers, or let me rephrase this, the responses we got do not complain about a lack of classroom space other than storage, or about having too many kids, having classrooms that are too small for the kids. Was the questionnaire not leaned in that, or not, guided in that direction? Why would that come up? I feel like at least somebody would have mentioned that they just simply don't have enough room for all the kids in their class in relation to class size. And again, maybe it wasn't worded that way, so it doesn't open it up to answers.
Yeah, I can share with you the the questionnaire after. The questionnaire did ask, what do you currently use for space? And then what are your current, what was an ideal space like? So it didn't go directly into, is your current space adequately sized? So I didn't ask that specific question.
Yeah, and I think to speak on behalf of from what I've heard from teachers, I think we could give them a 3,000 square foot classroom, and they would still say it's too many kids if they have more than 20 kids in the classroom.
Okay.
So, right. So I think that's a difference between how many kids is enough kids and what space do I need for an appropriately sized group of kids.
Right.
Yep.
And I'm just curious, or this is just a thought really on the tech lab suggestion. Our computer teacher is currently on a cart. So I think any dedicated space I'm just curious if we're really just talking about an updated computer lab. It looks like there might be some different ideas there, but she's currently on a cart and going room to room. So just wanted to note that.
Okay. Other comments that we heard. One person mentioned you should really consider moving the 5th grade down. Another person mentioned eliminating doors from the classrooms directly outdoors. That's more of a security, but it also comes into how you manage those. The art teachers obviously mentioned you got to separate the kilns. One person suggested we cluster art, music, and technology in a wing of whatever solution we create. And another person mentioned cluster the grade level teams together like you would a middle school model. So these are all kind of questions I have for this group of, are we in support of this? Again, I know we haven't started drawing solutions or anything yet, and you're probably all spinning like, how much is that going to cost? But is this something we want to accomplish? Do we want, in an ideal world, 6, 7, 8 as a cohort and 5th grade down? If a solution could afford to be done.
Pre-K to 5, I think, I feel like, and the feedback from the administration has been, would be ideal. Pre-K to 5.
I agree. I'm curious, and maybe it's on your next slide, Lance, does anyone talk about the fact that Clark is separate, that the kindergarten and preschool are in a separate building?
Nobody brought that up.
Okay.
I was actually surprised when they asked you to fill out where you teach. Not a single one told me whether they were at Clark or Wilkins.
Good.
They seem to have,
That's
they seem to have a one school mentality across both buildings, which is actually good.
Yeah.
So clustering art, music, and tech is pretty typical for elementary schools. Everybody's in agreement with that we kind of cluster those specialties. Good.
Yeah, and I would also comment, Lance, and you should talk to Meg Beauchamp and Anna Peril about the STARS program. That program has grown significantly as we've brought our special services into our district instead of sending our children out of the district. And it seems to me, when you're thinking about the challenges that some of those children have, and then the therapists like occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, it almost seems like a wing. Not separating the children, but just for when the children go, it's sort of all encompassed. So as educators are working together, they can have a common space where they can have meetings. There can be IEP meetings there. So just a special sort of wing. It's literally almost a wing now. It's almost a full hallway, but it's horribly located for that type of program.
Okay. Yeah. Some common thing we've been doing in a lot of middle schools is using the breakout areas that are out in the teams to be able to do some level of counseling and special education. One of the nice things about that is it doesn't have a stigma to it. If that room is used for a wide range of things, then your students needing special services, nobody really knows why they're in there. They could be in there for an AP class. They could be in there for a myriad of reasons. But we've also been creating some more private areas. So there's a good mix of that, so that some IEPs, or if it's simply a response to intervention, can happen right out there next to the rooms, and others are in the more secure, in the more separated areas.
Yeah, in terms of materials for some of like the OT room obviously can't, be in a common room that's shared with other students. But Yeah, I think some direct instruction is probably what you're talking about, where the more of the therapies kind of need their own well-designed spaces.
Yep. Understood. So I do have, that's one of the things on my next list of people to interview is the principals and special educators. So other significant comments that we received, a few people did fill out the questionnaire, not specific to those two buildings. One person noted district-wide, make sure we're flexible and have modern small group areas and learning commons in all of our buildings. We need more gym. One observation that same individual said, we really need more gym and auditorium space across the district. And we need staff collaboration areas in every building. And again, flexible learning areas. I think flexibility is kind of a given as to what we're going to create on everything. One person did fill out one for SHS, made a couple of comments, noting you need a more secure entrance and you need air conditioning. When we get to the that plan, I can show you how we're accomplishing those things. All right, so like I said, we've gotten really great feedback so far, and we're just about to take that and launch into what we call programming, which is creating a space list of everything you need to operate these buildings. Adam has shared with us the class sizes that you guys created. So we're in great shape there to start doing crunching some of the numbers. Also shared with us enrollment projections and where you are and where you're planned to be at. You can see there's a pretty wide range on the right-hand side there. There's a pretty wide range from class to class, but it does stabilize if you look left to right. It's a pretty stable population as well. So we should have a really good chance of designing now for what you need in the future. Anything we do will have some capacity built into it. We're not going to design, exactly the number of classrooms. So if a single kid added next year, then it messes up all your class schedules. We'll build in some capacity there, but it is good to see a stabilized enrollment so we're not, throwing darts in the dark. So our next steps leading towards that programming will be interviews. I'll set these up with Adam. Special education is one of the spaces that one of the interviews we need to have either as a team or by individuals. We can do that via Zoom. And principals. Now the principals did fill out these questionnaires, so we've already got some input from them, but I really want to kind of go down through and talk through some of their comments because I think it's very good comments. And there's far more feedback here than I'm sharing with them, kind of sharing the highlights tonight. Are there others besides special educators and principals that we need to engage as part of just understanding what are the space needs, before we even put pen to paper?
When you sent the questionnaire out, I'm assuming it went to all staff, not just, so like the maintenance team would have had an opportunity to weigh in on this, or no? Was it strictly reserved for teaching staff?
Actually, Adam, you guys had sent it out. I think it probably just went to educators. There were no questions on here about maintenance or anything. It was all about education. So.
I mean, I know we're in transition maybe in that area. There's a new director coming in, I believe, but I would think that the building level maintenance folks have a good handle too on some of their needs.
They do, and actually Roger Preston will be joining this committee once he starts. He's actually on the call right now watching as an attendee to get up to speed, and he'll be able to represent that voice as well.
Perfect. Great. Thank you.
All right, so I'll work to schedule some of those meetings. From there, we'll draft a program up of spaces. We'll review back with those individuals. We'll start with administrative review, and then I'll bring it back to this group. So you'll see a full program list that we can go down through and all the spaces you need. That kind of gives us enough parts to start doing some solutions soon. And so with that, I was going to change gears for just a moment because I've got the slideshow running, which is I know that you have a PR committee or marketing committee, and there are questions that we want to get input from the community. Now, obviously, asking a community what's difficult for a teacher is not the right approach, but there are some typical questions that we do ask community members to weigh in on, and we get some good feedback. A few things are givens though, and we typically don't need to worry about community input on these. So Any solution we create is going to have a good mechanical system, and I don't think we need whole community input to say the rooms should be comfortable. They should have good access to technology. We're going to have good natural light, and we're going to have a safe, secure environment. That's not really input we need because we know this is kind of, those are givens. Some typical questions we do ask community members in kind of large crowdsourcing are these. The first is, what's significant about your schools? So the kind of the do no harm approach. What do you love about your schools that we need to be aware of to make sure we don't, you know, mess with it? And I can send this to you in, after the fact into a Word document. What are your 5 desired outcomes? What do you want out of the school system? What do your kids want? I know a lot of people are just sitting there going, I want a diploma, or I want an employable adult, but it's nice to hear people put it in their own words. What is your desired outcome out of this building, out of this process? What do you think are your 5 obstacles the current school district faces? You know, are there obstacles in the way of this? Sometimes these are not building issues. Sometimes these are parents' opinions on the way the curriculum should modify, but do they feel that there are obstacles in the way right now? And then what teaching, learning, training models do you think the school district should be looking at that you don't currently support? Now you're going to get a wide range of answers here, and we would want to kind of vet this. And, you know, some of this is opinion, and obviously the school district cannot teach 2,000 different learning models in a single building. But these are the questions typically we would send out to the community and see what we can get from crowdsourcing. You know, what are they saying? What do they love? The number one question on the top is, what do you like about your school? So I'll send these over to you in a questionnaire. I don't know if this group has opinion on, are these the right questions that they would like to ask the community to weigh in on, or are there other questions we should also be considering or eliminating some of these?
I have a question. This came up during our meeting last week when we were talking about different kind of, you know, capturing all the different stakeholders. And we discussed, how do you get student voice? Like, you know, I realize in these buildings, particularly, they're younger kids, but I think it would be worthwhile and interesting, and this may be, you know, best accomplished through the administrators at the school, but to get some feedback from a student perspective about their day in the building and what they're looking for. I know that's really critical at our high school, and we really value that, and I'd like to see that pushed out to the Clark Wilkins and AMS for this process. So I don't know if anyone on here has any ideas or thoughts about that, Adam or Lance, if that's typical.
Yeah, questionnaires like this can easily be sent directly to students. Sometimes we do ask students additionally, what's your favorite program space in the building and why?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, it would vary for the younger, you know, I mean, there may be, you know, I know at our elementary school, there's a principal's council. So that's kind of the older kids in the school who might be able to answer, you know, a question like, you know, tell me the top 3 things that you like about your school building or something like that, a little more articulately. Sure. Student leadership at the middle school. So
I think we could probably modify this for student use at each level.
Great.
I mean, I don't think we're going to get a ton of great feedback from really young kids.
Right, exactly.
But yeah. Their parents, you'll be able to tell which ones had their parents help them.
Even the sampling, you know.
I do think it would be valuable because, you know, a lot of parents might not realize that, you know, the problem that sharing a cafeteria and a gym is for a kid. You know, my kids used to say it was just so noisy at lunch, and then they were supposed to be quiet. They were told to be quiet, but the gym is noisy. So I feel like those things do matter, like on a broader scale, obviously not like, oh, I don't like the art room, but the thing, or the temperature. I just remember the temperature at Wilkins. I mean, those radiators are like steaming out heat and they open the windows in the winter. So I think that kind of stuff is important when we go to the public and say, hey, this is important. This is what children are feeling, because it matters like it does at the high school. I think that's a great thing to tumble down to our elementary level and middle school level.
Excellent point.
And I guess, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Victoria.
I'd be curious about question number 4. What types of answers do you usually receive from the community on that?
Pretty limited on that. Most of the communities are not well-versed at educational delivery models.
Yep.
But if there are a few community members that really want you to invest more in STEAM or STEM or project-based learning because they've seen some articles on it and they think it's great. I'm actually pretty interested right now how many are going to say distance learning or not distance learning or a hybrid of distance learning. They're interesting times, and I think people have a different perspective on ways to learn. My guess is, if you're like my kids, some are very successful at distance learning and some are not. But it'll be interesting to see, I think, for all school districts, how is education going to change based on the giant experiment we just are under now.
Yeah, so just one thought on that fourth question, because right now, we have a competency-based education model, and we're having struggles with the tool that we use to record grading. And I feel like there's a lot of confusion amongst, do we like the system of learning, or is it the system of grading? And I just want to bring up that I'd be cautious about people's responses to question 4. Like, I don't know that they would be unnecessarily negative towards what we currently do, because we are kind of in a period of flux and change. So if we are going to use that question, I feel like we somehow need to weed out the how we're teaching kids, how we're grading kids, the system we use, and all of that.
Maybe it should be simplified to what curriculums would you like to see enhanced. I'm thinking along the lines of, we would like to see more hands-on learning, more projects.
Yeah.
And I think another question that might be worthwhile, our community uses our school buildings for many things beyond, the instruction that goes on during the day. So we have basketball programs there on the weekend. We have Boy Scouts of America there. I would be curious if there's a way to engage the community in that way when we're talking about our school buildings. Like what does the community want out of these buildings beyond the school day, if that makes sense?
I think so. Potentially, maybe what community uses should be considered as part of each facility.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you're going to get the obvious ones like the gymnasium, but it'd be great to hear if there are other spaces the community wants access to, the library,
So might we want to talk to the rec department, because they just bought space somewhere, Buck Meadow, I think, and it has a building. Maybe ask the director there what their plans are, so we know how much we should be considered. Not that would be the be all end all, but just kind of get their opinion on, do they think they'll have enough space over there for the rec center or for basketball or any of that? Just a thought.
Okay. All right. Is everybody ready to switch gears and talk a little bit about Sauhegan 2.0? All right. I know that was a lot to digest.
Yep.
Can everybody see my new screen? Whoop. Hold on. There. Can you see these Sauhegan 2.0 cover page?
Yes.
Right. So I'm going to go pretty quickly through this report. I want to be respectful of people's time. What we've done is we looked at how the spaces were currently being used, how the students travel. This is documenting that. And then we worked back and forth with administrators and faculty to create a solution. I will say that this was a student-driven effort, and students had significant input and actually some extraordinary ideas on how the space should be created. Administrators, of course, we did feed that back to the administrators, and they actually fully embraced and agreed with much of the student ideas on how the space should look. In simple terms, looking at the first floor, we did reorganize it. We put in a secure main entrance, and we moved administration around to be able to accomplish that, so you're not walking across the building. The biggest difference is creating a student commons and a collaboration area right in the center of that building. That means gutting out that center area. A lot of the students talked about that personal use space and student focused areas, as well as a lot of the teachers we talked about. The culture you have there is actually extraordinary. We did look to create a wellness center that kind of co-located some of the special education and wellness programs and life skills. We felt expanding that student commons out into the dining area and not having a room, we realized that the cafeteria really is used for only certain blocks of the day, that a student common should bleed into that and should try and use that whole area all periods of the day and set it up. It actually has small breakout spaces off it. That is, the way we're kind of setting that up is similar to the professional development areas we talked about earlier, where it has a large gathering area, then it has small breakouts. That does both work for student lunches, but it also works for large group, small group activities. We updated the locker rooms. They're in pretty bad need just in their current use. And we did put in a school store and a community cafe right in the center of the building. On the upper floor, similar type philosophies where we're really trying to open things up. This is where the library is, and we worked with the librarians and the administrators to kind of define a library that is an open library. So it does have some security in that how you enter the space, but a lot of it is a learning commons of its own and almost a resource center learning commons. So if you're doing, more like a college library would be, where you're going there, you have access to materials, but you've got space to work and space to collaborate. On the main building, big goal was new science labs, rehabbing all of these science labs and creating space that isn't there today. We also expanded, you currently have one learning commons. We expanded that learning commons and also put in an innovation studio. This is in line with a lot of your curriculum initiatives, creating innovation studios and seminar classrooms next to it that is flexible use. I mean, the good part of this building is you have adequate space. It just needs to be reconfigured. So you're not squeezed for space. We have very different answers to questions from this group than we did from the middle school, say. That not everybody is kind of on top of each other. The spaces aren't quite what they're looking for. IT was set up as kind of a resource again to students district-wide. And we did on the upper floor again, continue to configure the locker rooms into team rooms. So we broke these into several different renovation areas, different levels. We had renovation level 1, level 2, and level 3. Some of them are pretty light renovation in terms of moving walls. It was just HVAC and electrical. Others were moving some walls, and some were full gut reno. Same thing on each floor. And if you get a copy of the report, you'll see that you can drill into any given space and understand what's equipped in each room. They're pretty detailed documents. Floor by floor departments, these are kind of blow-ups of those areas, blow-ups of the locker rooms. What we want to do is, and then of course the annex. Now the annex spun out from this to just the science labs. The way we ultimately landed on the annex was that the annex itself would be set up as an art center on the first floor, have the engineering and arts co-located there, and innovation studio here. We felt this actually would set itself up well for community use of the annex too, given that it's a separate building. Any adult ed could be out here. And we said any space that could serve for adult ed, we tried to get one of each type of space in the annex. So you have your engineering and maker space out there that a lot of districts are considering for adult ed now because they're pretty specialized rooms. We've got art areas. We do have a staff room there, and that innovation studio is kind of that flex learning area. On the upper floor, you can see the current science labs now. This is the project that we talked a little bit about earlier, about should this be funded sooner. The science labs on the left-hand side, that's existing, and on the right, you can see their space. Now, a modern science lab, recommendations from the DOE are 1,400 square feet. A lot of districts are pushing a little bit higher than that. Right now, your science labs are 800, so it makes sense to kind of take a wall down and turn them into 1,600 square foot science labs. That has taken on a life of its own that's beyond this report. There are very detailed drawings, and we're continuing to work with the science department on the first 2 labs and what those would look like. What they're essentially describing is not necessarily what's shown here, but they're flexible labs set up for specific curriculum. So one is for biotech and chem, and the other one is set up for freshman science and earth-space science. So it's more flexible and more rearrangeable and more collaborative. The report does, if you get a copy of it, if you're not a person who loves to read architectural plans, we did provide 3D views of every space just to give you an idea of how these spaces lay out. Furnishings are just placeholders. Those are not the final furnishings layouts. They're just there to give you a little bit of scale. Again, pretty much every area. One thing that was also pertinent to this report is when we met with your facilities director was trying to set up a maintenance building out by the fields. We worked with them and ultimately decided that it could be a prefabbed metal building. It's an very affordable building, that it should have 4 bays of, garage bay type maintenance bays, that it would be roughly 32 by 64. You have a location that fits on your site without significant site work right at the end of that parking lot. We did some design character sessions, and we did these with the students. The types of spaces, these are the types of spaces they really said they would love to see when they came into a high school. Some of these are simply color, but I think if you look closely, you'll find it's not just color, and we tried to steer them away from don't just pick the ones that are bright. What they provided was the types of spaces that they would be in, as in collaborative learning areas, student-driven areas, comfort areas where they can be on a laptop, they could be meeting with classmates, they could be meeting with teachers, and kind of this open, safe area. More of those in various sizes. You can see small group spaces that they said would be ideal for them, and larger group areas and work areas. With the culture you have of kind of that independent learning, those spaces on the right are almost professional areas that you're seeing. More spaces like that. You can see where your teachers said they like the SNHU sandbox. You can see some of the design philosophies that would have gone into spaces like that and how that kind of works together. Open common areas, that's that center court area. And then there's a soft, comfortable seating that's movable. Cafeteria type space that doesn't look like just a cafeteria, but looks more like a comfortable area to be. And heavily reconfigurable areas. The area on the right is actually all movable walls that are actually bought as furniture, and the area on on the left is movable walls, and the area on the right is actually just movable furnishings, and that you said from year to year we could recreate this space with simple furnishings and no major construction projects. Few of these are very modern schools, but they love the idea of having these individual areas where they could go, work individually, be seen, but still be private to some degree, as well as kind of these conference rooms, what a modern conference room might look like. A few more fun spaces. That one on the left in the center is actually a movable room that one company makes as furnishings. And they said if we had enough area, that'd be cool to move that, be able to move that around and reconfigure our school semester to semester, year to year. And then just kind of some, the types of collaboration spaces they're looking for. So from there, we did also do the technical stuff. Fitzmyer-Tachi was engaged as mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. They wrote full reports on your fire protection, mechanical, electrical systems, the current condition they are, and then the solutions for each area. They also did zone out this area so you could do projects. You can see different systems in different areas of the buildings based on different needs. Annex has its own system, obviously, and there is more air conditioning here than there is in the current building. One of the comments that you heard is Can we provide air conditioning? They did do a mixture of air conditioning, dehumidification, and ventilation, trying to be cost effective, but also trying to create that, a good environment. Each floor was zoned out. That was able to give them, and we looked at different options of units. We worked with our construction estimator to price the various options. So there's option 1, 2, and 3 in there. And ultimately that went into the costing report so that you had some flexibility in costs. From there, we gave the full project. If you did everything all at once, and essentially we did everything I just described, we gave a full cost analysis. What it was roughly $26 million of construction if you were to tackle it all. Total project was about 31 million when you consider all fees, furnishings, equipment, all what we would call soft costs. That does include contingency. We carried in $1.8 million in contingency at this time. Any of these numbers do need to be updated periodically. This report, when we created it, was valid then, but as anybody would tell you, the construction market is definitely in turmoil now. And anytime you consider one of these projects, you would want to redo the numbers on that with an updated construction estimate. So the rest of the report, for anybody who loves detail, gets into where every dollar was spent. And if you really want to pick at it and say, the doorknobs look like they were
made of gold.
Plated. They were made of gold. But, well, gold doesn't corrode, so we thought it would be a good idea.
It does. It can. With the acid on the guys these days.
What's that?
With the acid on the ends these days, it corrode.
Yeah. So that is Sauhegan 2.0 in a nutshell as it exists today. Like I noted, there is a lot of projects in there, and I know the people have already considered which project is a higher priority. I think universally, the science labs seem to rise to the top amongst all the administrators to say this seems to be a high priority for us. Students, obviously, they want that common area, that student space, but.
I have a question. I assume that you went to the staff the same way that you're going to staff for the other project that we're working on for the Amherst project. What else besides the science labs were staff driven or staff highlighted?
I think ultimately we were able to share the plan with several staff members and they were in support of each of the areas. I know the principal at the time was very key in engaging the staff and bringing that information back to us, but I would say I know I said the students gave a ton of input, but every time the students had an idea when we met with the staff, they said that's a great idea, or else it didn't make it to this report. And I wouldn't say 100% of the students' ideas were taken, but a lot of these ideas were born out of an understanding of both students and staff. It's also fair to say that every time we met with students, there were staff in the room, and so that there was a good collaboration effort. We weren't just saying, tell us what you want. We were more discussing it as a group of what does the library look like in the future? And for that conversation, we pulled the librarian in.
Okay. I have another question on our count of students. I know we have some grades in our elementary school and in our middle school who have more students in cohorts. Have we tracked to see what classrooms will be used and what that looks like as those kids fill in Sauhegan, to know if we have as much flex space as we do right now?
Adam, I don't know if you've looked at the population projections and how that affects what we've done here for 2.0. I think 2.0 was focused more on your current population.
It is, but I would say that our Sauhegan campus has headroom in terms of capacity. We had over 1,000 students there not that long ago, and we're tracking at 750 up through around 1,000 at the very high end anywhere in the future. So I'm not worried about building capacity. Does that answer the question, Victoria?
It does.
Okay.
It does. I think it hits on that 1,000 kids can fit in, and we can still do some of these fun things in Sauhegan 2.0.
Yes, indeed. Well, if I'd be remiss if I didn't say there have been conversations over the past several years about whether the annex is used or repurposed for other things, right? And I don't want to lose that in this conversation. Things, and it's very complicated. There's many complications, but things people have thought about: the 8th grade, the 4th grade, special education programming, kindergarten, preschool, all sorts of other things being used as a way to be more efficient with our resources. So that shouldn't be lost in this conversation either.
So when we talk about that, though, the science lab project that Sohegan is looking at is for the annex.
It is. Yep, that's fair, and that should be considered.
At this committee level or at the?
No, with the boards. So my opinion, I'm just going to share my opinion. My opinion is that the science lab renovation project is real money. It's not cheap. It's not pennies we're talking about. It's real dollars we're talking about. But all of our other facility issues that we're looking into are, if we agreed today to put a project on the ballot in March, the earliest we'd have something usable and available is 3 years from now, 2.5 to 3 years from now. And so the potential to lose or to have spent money on science lab renovations that are only used for 3 years or 3 school years is not the greatest use of tax dollars, but it's not the worst either. It's 3 better years of science labs than we would have had otherwise. And so I think it's still a worthwhile thing in the short term.
So I just, Adam, my recollection from our first version of the Joint Facilities Committee when we toured the annex was there were significant challenges with bringing any lower grade into that building, right?
There are. Yep. I'm trying to be transparent in that we've had those conversations in the past.
I think that's fair. And that's why I wanted to share my recollection and the discussions that have taken place to this point regarding that as an option. So, you know, it just didn't sound like it was a really viable option that we would be, you know, that we're going to discuss it and look into it, but there would be, you know, if you bring a younger grade, you're going to need to retrofit a lot of things in the building to accommodate smaller humans, right? That was one challenge. And then the separation of, okay, if you have a middle school grade in its own building, but they need services that are still at the middle school, then that's a logistical challenge. Right. So I guess I just wanted to share that with the group who may not have been privy to those prior discussions. But the science labs we know are currently in use and are a challenge for.
Yeah, and the 2 most likely uses for the annex outside of a high school purpose would be something like kindergarten or preschool, which NFPA 101 restricts them to be on the first floor of the building. So the science labs would still be available on the 2nd floor. The other one is for special education, special programs. And again, those would likely be things that we would locate on the 1st floor of the annex and not likely to be the 2nd. So I'm confident it's worth disclosing, but I'm confident that it wouldn't be a waste of funds to use the 2nd floor to do a 2nd floor science renovation.
Stephanie?
Yeah, so actually, Adam, that was one question I was having was if they were talking about building the special ed programs up in the high school, similar to, you know, what's appropriate for the high school as there is in the middle school. Is there space in this for that? I only see like really one truly dedicated life skills space, but the OT, PT, any of that stuff, I'm not sure if that's been thought out in here. Or it takes up more classroom space and we run out of space problem.
Lance, because you shared your screen, I'll let you answer first.
So when we did meet with them, we went through some of the spaces they needed. We do have guidance areas, and we did have creating the new life skills area and the other life skills area, as well as a culinary community kitchen for that. I don't know as if we delved in the detail of the OT-PT spaces, but I know that those were some of the discussions we had for new spaces that don't currently exist that we're trying to create up front.
Okay. All right. I also had another question just on the second floor, just for my understanding. Up in the student learning common area, there's something that's called a maker space. And what does that actually refer to? It's next to the TV studio. And the other question I have is there's a tech training center that's up there too. I'm just curious what that's for.
Sure.
What?
So makerspace has a lot of definitions for a lot of people. Essentially, it's a room of requirement. What they described it as, this makerspace would be paper type projects and printed type projects that they could put together. And we're seeing a lot of project-based learning and independent projects go on in here. So the makerspace off this library, they had said if a student's doing boards for a presentation for world languages, or if they're doing an independent project of their own, or if they're working on something, an invention type project, that they need a space that has good utilities, good exhaust, and materials for cutting, creating, putting things together, and adequate storage to be able to store those materials, as well as layout space where they could leave it out and not just try to create it in one session. That was an extension of the library, and we're seeing that more and more for schools, that each library is trying to create a create area. So that was the sense of that makerspace there.
Okay. And then that tech training area.
Tech training area, which is
right below. It's right by the stairs. I keep going down from the student common, that bottom left corner.
Oh,
there's the
yes.
word that says tech training area. So what is that?
So that was described as, with all the technology upgrades you have, you need to do constant technology training for both teachers and students. So every time you have launch a new area, or you have new technology, they say we really need a space where we're constantly implementing, here's a new software that everybody's going to have, and have a classroom kind of dedicated to that. I think what they described as multi-screens to be able to pull that up, and heavily wired and air conditioned so that everybody could be on a laptop saying, yeah, I've got the new technology understanding.
Oh, okay.
Originally, Steve Coughlin asked that it be labeled the fax machine training area. So,
Christine, I saw your hand up. Did you still have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the repurposing of the annex, because I too thought that that wasn't something we were considering because of the obstacles with bringing younger kids in. And if it is a board decision, is that something we should ask them for their thoughts on now before we decide we like this plan, we really want to move the 5th grade up back down to an elementary school? If we can, we would need to do that if we put the kindergartners over at the annex. So do we need to have a decision on that soon before we go too far into this? I don't know. I guess that question is for you, Adam.
my opinion is that this committee is charged with making that recommendation.
Okay.
I think you all represent a wide swath of our community, and I think that's exactly the type of thing that you're supposed to wrestle with and make a decision about, and then recommend. And the voters will let us know when they vote for the plan, and they get and they'll have opportunities for feedback before they vote, obviously, as well. And so we'll know well ahead of time. But I think really you're here to make that recommendation.
Okay. Thanks.
Victoria?
Do we have the opinion of the administration regarding the annex? It seems like without a principal on these several panels that maybe we don't have everybody's input.
So I can represent the administration's input. We've had several conversations about this.
Okay.
If the only thing that we're interested in for the annex would be special programs, for the potential use of the first floor of the annex, only if it remains cost effective to do so, and if it gives us the opportunity to tuition in other students to help pay for the programs that we run for our own students. So that's the one potential purpose that we find valuable. The administrative opinion is that our pre-K through 5 students in Amherst should be under one roof.
Great. Thanks. I think that clears it up. I have a question about the So when we're talking about the annex and the need for additional life skills spaces, and Adam, you just mentioned special programs, and we know, I believe I've heard in board meetings that we have a larger population of students moving up to the high school that will need those type of opportunities. Is that a way that we could repurpose the annex so that, it's still for the high school, but, so you could still have those upgraded science labs and then have the space on the first floor for those programs? Is that
Yeah.
something you could look at, or is it worth the efforts of this group to have that push?
It is. We are curious about whether we could have something that would be special programming for grades 5 through 12 located there. That's kind of using both the resources for AMS and Sohegan in a joint way, because there's not enough students to fill the whole floor of the annex for either of the two schools, but both together would be probably a much more efficient delivery model as well. So if I asked Meg Beauchamp about that, she would come on here and say, please give me the first floor of the annex. I could do wonderful things for students at both AMS and Sohegan. We've not gotten far down that pathway because these conversations about other things have to happen first. But that is, Meg would be excited to do that. The high school would not be excited to give up that first floor. I want to say that as well.
There's a large art room on that first floor, if I recall. Is that correct?
There is. There actually, on the first floor, end of the hallway on the back left are art rooms, and one of which was originally a cafeteria meant for use in the annex, which again is another interesting design feature of the annex.
But now it has a large, doesn't it have like a large kiln and everything in it? Yeah. Okay.
I'm going to say something that is going to feel very controversial. I don't mean it to be controversial, but I am going to throw it out there to this group. When we, as a district, brought in full day kindergarten, we lost reading specialists, and that impacted students who were in regular education classrooms who did not have those reading specialists available to them. With full disclosure that my children are in 4th and 5th grade and they are part of this big cohort, I'm nervous to hear us put a lot of space into a special education program in the building and still make sure that we have the ability to do small class sizes. It matters. I've seen the difference. And it's something that I know it's very controversial and I feel terrible saying it, but it needs to be thought about for the majority of our educated students. So
I'm not sure it's as controversial as you think, Victoria. I would tend to agree with you that for me, I still rely on the Tennessee Star Study and its view of class size and how important it is to outcomes later on. I wasn't here for the full day kindergarten piece, but I can tell you that we've added specialists, it seems like, in the last couple of years. And I think maybe those positions now exist when maybe they were cut at one point in time. But I would agree with you that we need to have appropriate class sizes K-12, 100%.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions about 2.0 or anything we need to dig into there tonight?
I'm going to just put my 2 cents worth in about the annex. I would prefer it stays as classrooms for the high school, just to make sure that we're providing a variety of classes available to the students. So, they just don't have a science class and an English class, and we have a lot of AP classes and physics and chemistry and, a bunch of different types of computer classes, things like that, that if we start losing computer space, or not computers, but classroom space, that we don't have the ability to offer all those classes too. So I would tend to want to keep the annex within the high school and not repurpose it.
Yeah, Stephanie, I don't disagree. I'm relying a little bit my opinion is based kind of on Steve Frady's work that looked at our capacity of class sizes. And it looks like we're at 70 to 75% capacity any period of the day, with our 6th period being the most busy at I think 80 or something like that. So if we get another couple hundred kids in town, I'd feel differently.
Yeah.
Tim?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Stephanie also, at least in the near term, because we don't know what's going to happen with the population over the next few years exactly. But if we decide that we want to go ahead with these renovations, what I like with the annex renovations is, especially with the first floor, it looks like you could retrofit it very easily if you, not necessarily to the design, but I'm saying if you needed to take those large rooms, what gets converted into large rooms, back into small rooms, that you could do it for probably reasonable cost if you needed that space converted that way. You're not doing any major wall movements, and not like in the main building, with the exception of where that kiln and art supply area is going to be. So other than that, I think it's reasonable to move ahead with those renovations, knowing that, again, in the future, they could be reverted to smaller classes if needed. That's just my opinion on that.
Okay, so how about this? For the purposes of kind of moving forward, and we had the discussion about the annex, as a group then, how, and just sort of like this isn't anything official, but just kind of, do we all support Lance and Ann moving forward, not considering the annex as a space for our middle school grades or our elementary school grades? Is that the feeling of the group? And you could just, yeah, okay. All right, John, did you have any thoughts on it? I didn't.
Well, we, as a committee, we've been designated to do certain criterias, and I think this is one of them. So it just needs to be on the table, and then you let the boards decide which way to go. But you still make a recommendation of which way you feel that this committee recommends. So it's either or with the way you present it, but you should still cover all the aspects of what we're talking about.
Right, okay. So I think then we've discussed the annex, and our recommendation at this time is for LaValle Brunsinger to move forward with the study in the Amherst School District and not consider the annex as an option for any of the grades at those schools. Is that, yeah. Okay, great. So our next meeting is June 18th. Are there any other questions or any thoughts before we adjourn? Victoria, you're muted.
I know, I realized it. I feel like we did a lot tonight, so I'm excited as a committee. I feel like we're starting to really get going. I know from the PR committee standpoint, we're ready to go, and I appreciate the good conversation and everything that Lance, that you showed us tonight. I think was really helpful to go through 2.0 rather than us just look at the documents and see that it looks great. It's nice to see also where you're going to be coming with something for the Amherst School District.
Yeah, and like I mentioned earlier, the PR committee's meeting next week to discuss our June update to the citizen. What we sort of talked about was, depending on what we learned in tonight's meeting, being able to share anything from the faculty surveys. It'll probably just kind of be, the high level overview of where we are in the process. So unless anybody has any other, and we'll share it out, of course, before we send anything out there. But if anybody has any other thoughts or burning ideas about what they want to see from the committee in there, let us know, because we certainly want it to be everyone's voice. All right, great. Well, with that, we can adjourn the meeting at 7:36, and we will see everyone on June 18th.